Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. It was a dull afternoon at Tribunal de Jefferson County, Missouri. The sky outside was a thick gray, and a light rain beat against the high windows of the courtroom like a mournful metronome. The air inside was heavy, charged with pent-up electricity, and the pale fluorescent light gave faces a waxen pallor. The benches were full, journalists with a sharp gaze, law students who nervously scribbled in their notebooks, curious came to see what the newspapers were already announcing as the trial of shame. But most of all, there was silence. Not a banal silence, but a silence dense, thick, almost sacred. The kind of silence that falls when something serious is about to happen. People held their breath. Even the clock seemed hesitant to tick away. Sitting in the dock, Richard Grayson, 78, a decorated former sergeant in the Vietnam War, proudly wore his old military uniform. The fabric was threadbare at the elbows, the seam slightly unstitched at the right shoulder, but the uniform remained crisp, pressed, almost ceremonial. On his chest, several medals still gleamed, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart, and the Legion of Merit, vestiges of a past where he had risked his life for his country. He leaned on a hand-carved, dark wooden cane, once a gift from a fallen comrade. His back remained straight, despite his age. His steely blue gaze calmly swept the room. He wasn't there to plead. He was there on principle. By conviction. He was not afraid. Facing him, standing behind the bar, was attorney Raymond Calloway, tall, black suit over an impeccable white shirt, haircut as rigid as his ethics. He was a man known for his implacable coldness, for his ability to apply the law without ever giving in to emotion. He had neither the patience for human stories nor the humility to recognize nuance. He believed in order, not justice. He loved rules, texts, code numbers. He quoted them like others quote psalms. In his mouth, compassion was weakness, and humanity, an administrative error. He leaned slightly towards his microphone, and said in a clear, crisp voice, without warmth. "Mr. Grayson, you have sheltered a homeless person in your garage. This is a violation of City Code 12-45B. The residential zones in your neighborhood do not allow this type of occupancy." A tense silence followed. Richard raised his head slightly, unfazed. His voice, deep and slow, echoed through the room. This man was going to die of cold. He had frostbite, he was shivering. He had served in the 82nd Airborne Division. Same as me. I wasn't going to let him die in the street when I had a roof over my head. A dull emotion vibrated in his tone. No anger. No rebellion. Just moral certainty. But Calloway frowned. He approached Richard slowly. He looked him up and down, as if contemplating not a man, but an obstacle. Then, with a gesture as brutal as it was unexpected, he raked out and yanked the medals off attached to Richard's jacket. The sound of the metal clips snapping under the force echoed like thunder. The decorations fell to the floor one by one with a chilling clang. The room gasped. Murmurs of outrage rose from the back rows. A woman covered her mouth. A young student half rose before sitting back down, his eyes wide. But Calloway didn't seem troubled. He threw the medals at Richard's feet as if rendering a verdict. These decorations become meaningless if you choose to break the law, even in the name of a supposed moral duty, he declared dryly. Then he stepped back, hands clasped behind his back, sure of himself. Richard stood still. He looked at the medals on the ground. These pieces of metal that, years earlier, had been awarded in ceremonies filled with tears, memories, and respect. Symbols of courage. Of honor. Of sacrifice. But he didn't cry. He didn't bend down. He didn't say anything. He kept his eyes fixed on them, as if silently whispering that he was not ashamed. The silence he offered in return was more powerful than any speech that he said everything that words could no longer express, contempt, injustice, but also intact dignity. And in this room filled with frozen faces, his silence became a mirror. A mirror in which everyone had to look at themselves. 10 minutes later. The courtroom still hadn't caught its breath. A heavy silence hung like a black cloud over the oak benches. The judge, Edward Lansing, a normally impassive man, stared into space before him, visibly troubled. His gavel lay forgotten on his desk. The journalists murmured among themselves, the cameras continued to roll, capturing every shudder, every sigh. We felt that something was approaching, like a wave still invisible, but irresistible. Then, without warning, the large wooden doors of the courthouse slammed open against the walls. A blast of cold air swept through the room. A man entered. Imposing. Calm. Unshakable. His navy blue uniform was impeccable, pressed to the crease. On his shoulders, 4 stars shone like oaths of steel. He advanced with the rigor of a soldier on a mission, without a glance at the cameras or the murmurs that swelled around him. It was General Marcus Grayson. Richard's only son. Hero of Middle Eastern conflicts. Respected commander of the National Guard. A living legend in military circles, whose mere presence inspired both fear and respect. The room, stunned, froze instantly. Even the judge stood up, as if by instinct, like a civilian who senses true authority entering the room. Calloway, standing at the bar, turned pale. His chin twitched, and he made a step back, as if he had just seen a ghost appear. Marcus said nothing. He walked slowly, each step echoing like a drum in the silence. He reached his father, still sitting motionless, his gaze lowered towards his medals scattered on the ground. Without a word, the general knelt down. A rare gesture. Almost sacred. He picked up the medals one by one, wiped them carefully with a white handkerchief from his inside jacket pocket, and then replaced them with infinite care on Richard's chest. He pressed gently on each clasp, as if to restore weight to the wounded honor. His father said nothing. But in the discreet fluttering of their glances, there was everything: silent gratitude, modest love, and the transmission of intact dignity. Then Marcus straightened up. He slowly turned towards the judge. His voice, when it finally rose, was calm, restrained, but sharp as an officer's blade. "May I speak, Your Honor?" The judge nodded, almost with relief. "Of course, General Grayson. You have the floor." Marcus took a few steps forward. He stopped in the center of the room. He looked straight ahead. Then his gaze slowly fell on Raymond Calloway, like a spotlight on an impostor. "My father served this country for 28 years old, twice wounded in action, awarded a medal for bravery, responsible for the evacuation of 12 men under enemy fire during the Quang Tri offensive. He slept in the mud. He saw death. He looked fear in the eye and chose to stand." He paused, scanning the crowd. "What you took from him, Mr. Prosecutor, wasn't just metal. It was a life. It was blood. It was honor. And you did it in front of this courtroom, in front of cameras, without an ounce of respect, as punishment for an act of compassion. For offering shelter to a former brother in arms." He then took out a folder with official letterhead from his black briefcase. "Here is a letter from the Department of Defense, co-signed by the Secretary of Homeland Security. It states that my father's action is consistent with the founding values of our nation: compassion, duty, fraternity." He then slowly approached Calloway. There was no anger in his steps, but an icy authority. When he was 2 meters from the prosecutor, he fixed his eyes on his. "What you did is not justice. It is a public humiliation. It is an empty, proud, and cruel demonstration of power." He took a step back. Then he turned to face the entire room. "I've been in the military since I was 18. I've seen war up close. But what I saw here today is a wound I'll never forget." The room exploded with murmurs. Some stood up. An old lady wept softly. A young law student whispered, "Honor, finally." And for the first time in years, Judge Lansing banged his gavel, not to ask for order, but to close this sacred moment. He then declared in a solemn voice, "The court suspends this hearing until further notice." Attorney Calloway's conduct will be subject to immediate disciplinary review. And as the general walked over to his father and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, Calloway, pale, realized that true authority was never that which one imposed, but that which one inspired. The next morning, at dawn, the whole world had seen the scene. The images were shown on a loop on all national news channels. Attorney Raymond Calloway, with a hard look, coldly tearing the medals off an old man decorated for war. Then, a few minutes later, the solemn entry of General Marcus Grayson, the silence of the room, and his powerful speech, worthy of a head of state. The contrast between the brutality of one and the dignity of the other was so striking that even those who had never heard of the trial stopped to watch. Within 24 hours, the images had crossed borders. Social networks went up in flames. 2 hashtags in particular became viral in a few hours. Hashtag Respect Richard, to honor the humiliated veteran. And hashtag Stolen Honor, a national cry of indignation against what was perceived as an outrage against all veterans. Of the thousands of messages flocked. Soldiers stationed in Afghanistan posted photos of themselves with their hands on their hearts. Retirees sent handwritten letters to Richard Grayson. Teachers told their students what true loyalty was. Then came the most striking visual shock. The day after the trial, from 6 a.m., a silent tide formed in front of the Jefferson County Court. Veterans from across the state, sometimes from other parts of the country, had gathered. More than 2,000 men and women in uniform, some on crutches, others in wheelchairs, all stood straight, proud, their eyes closed during the minute of silence. They wore their decorations clearly visible on their jackets. No shouting. No signs. Only the sound of medals gently clinking in the wind, as a reminder that honor never dies in silence. Images of this silent procession made the opening of the evening news. The cameras captured a moving moment, a young Marine, on his knees, placing his silver star on the courthouse steps, tears in his eyes. In the days that followed, calls for Raymond Calloway's resignation multiplied. Senators, former mayors, and federal judges expressed their public dismay. The Secretary of Defense he himself declared in a conference. We can debate the law, but we can never justify the humiliation of a man who risked his life for his country. During this time, the Missouri State Bar Ethics Commission opened an internal investigation. Internal videos and testimonies from former colleagues began to emerge. Calloway, once protected by his status as a model prosecutor, became a symbol of bureaucratic arrogance. Under increasing pressure, he was temporarily suspended, while awaiting the commission's verdict. He tried to ignore the media. His communications team advised him to remain silent. But the uproar was too great. The 15th day, when the matter reached Washington, Calloway called a brief press conference. His face tense, his suit wrinkled, he read a short statement, without warmth, without conviction. I have decided to resign as Jefferson County District Attorney. This decision is mine. I remain convinced that I acted within the law, but I recognize that my actions offended public sensibilities. No reporter interrupted him. He left the room through a side door, avoiding questions. His resignation was accepted immediately, sans regret, neither applause nor thanks. But the story did not end there. Richard Grayson, for his part, remained discreet and humble. He refused several interviews, simply repeating, "I'm not a hero. I just opened a door." But in the streets, the schools, the barracks, the name Grayson became a symbol of silent integrity. And for an entire generation, this affair recalled a truth that the era seemed to have forgotten. Honor is not erased by laws. It is carried in the heart, and it is defended uprightly, without hatred, but with dignity. A few months later, on a clear spring morning, the great hall of the Missouri State Capitol was bathed in light. The white marble columns shone beneath the glass of the dome, and a silent crowd filled the place. Military uniforms mingled with the dark suits, and the atmosphere, although solemn, was imbued with a palpable respect. On the main stage, Governor Ellen Whitmore, the first woman elected head of state, stepped up to the lectern. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. Today we pay tribute to a man who reminded us, without fanfare, what it truly means to serve one's country. She invited Richard Grayson to join her. The old man slowly climbed the steps, leaning on his cane, accompanied by his son, General Marcus Grayson, in full uniform. The applause that followed was not loud, but deep, like a single collective heartbeat. Richard received that day the Medal of Civic Merit, one of the state's highest distinctions, for his moral courage, his exemplary humanity, and his continued service to the nation, even long after the battlefield. But that was not all. Beside him stood a straight-eyed, clean-shaven man, dressed in a simple but clean suit. He was James Miller, the former homeless man he had taken in. Formerly invisible to the eyes of institutions, James was officially recognized as a Gulf War veteran, and benefited from comprehensive support, housing, medical care, psychological support, and above all, a second chance. He then went up on stage, his eyes shining, and declared into the microphone. "I thought I'd been forgotten. That my service had been for nothing. But one day, a man opened his garage to me, and, with that simple gesture, he gave me a future again." There was total silence. Then, slowly, the audience rose. A standing ovation burst out. Tears rolled down the cheeks of some soldiers. A few weeks later, a foundation was created in their names. Grayson and Miller Shelter Project. Its goal, to provide shelter, medical assistance and moral support to forgotten veterans, those whom society had left behind. The project attracted donations from across the country. Former military personnel dedicated their retirement years to it. Architects volunteered their time. Even former politicians came to lend a hand. The first reception center was opened in Jefferson County, the very place where the trial had taken place. Ironically, it was housed in the former administrative building of District Attorney Calloway's office. In the peaceful garden of his home in Springfield, Richard Grayson found peace in simple things. Every night, he sat under a gnarled oak tree planted by his wife, who had died years earlier. A sturdy tree, like himself, that had stood the test of time. On the small table next to him, a wooden box contained blackened photos of his brothers in arms, a handkerchief embroidered by his eldest daughter, and the letter from the Department of Defense. Sometimes his son Marcus came over to share a moment. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they simply watched the wind play in the leaves, or a squirrel jump between the branches. One afternoon, a young man local journalist came to interview him for a documentary about veterans. He expected war anecdotes, heroic tales. But what he received was much more essential. "Mr. Grayson, after everything you've been through, this whole thing, what do you remember?" The old man looked at the horizon for a moment, a slight smile playing on his lips. He placed his hand on his chest, where his medals once again rested. Then he answered in a soft but firm voice. "Medals, they're pieces of metal. Weight, silence, and dust. What can't be taken away from you is dignity. She doesn't let herself be torn away. She keeps herself within herself, as long as we remain standing.